only on Republic TV.
प्योर सूजी पास्ता उबालो मिलाओ और खाओ
8 मिनट में तैयार।
क्या टेस्ट है सबका राजा आर प्योर मसाला। केसरिया से मन जोगी हुआ रे दिल झूमे देखो मतवारा हुआ रे केसरिया से मन जोगी हुआ।
हर पल मनाओ केसरी त्योहार। विमल बोलो जुबान केसरी।
दादी के हाथों का जादू और खुशबू से महकता घर, माँ की मुस्कुराहट और खाने की सुगंध। MDH गरम मसाला,
क्योंकि हर रिश्ता है स्वाद से जुड़ा।
थोड़े में ज्यादा स्वाद यही तो है इसकी खास बात। वाओ मामा क्या स्वाद है। अरे मेरे राजा मसाला।
Iran is boiling. Iranians are protesting against the Khamenei regime. U.S. President Donald Trump has urged Iranians to keep protesting and take over institutions, and has assured them that help is on the way.
Well, no, they're starting to, it looks like, and there seem to be some people killed that aren't supposed to be killed. These are violent, if you call them leaders, I don't know if they're leaders or just they rule through violence. But we're looking at it very seriously. The military is looking at it, and we're looking at some very strong options. We'll make a determination. Well, if they do that, we'll consider things targets that they wouldn't believe. If they do that, we will hit them at levels that they've never been hit before. They won't even believe it. I have options that are so strong. So, I mean, if they did that, it'll be met.
Hi there, welcome back to your favorite deep dive show on stories contemporary and consequential for India. This week we picked 3, 2 domestic and 1 from foreign affairs. First up, ever wondered how the markets reacted to Moody's downgrades of India in the early years of liberalization? Those ratings agencies acted as a Damocles sword on our economy and a geopolitical weapon to control India's march to progress, as also that of the developing world. Now India is hitting back with a rating system of its own. We take a look. Second, has Donald Trump overplayed the tariff card? As he completes 1 year in office as President of the United States during his second term, what lessons we have from the trade data? And finally, a battle of narratives in which we focused on the Nehru in JNU last week takes us to Somnath this episode. How Prime Minister Modi is setting things right, as in from left of center to right of center, as a national mission. Let's get going. More people searched for the Somnath temple on Google this week than all of the last 20 years. That's the kind of impact Prime Minister Narendra Modi's brainwave of marking 1,000 years of the attack on the temple by Mahmud of Ghazni as Swabhiman Parv, festival of self-respect, had on the masses. The historical site, sacred to a great mass of Hindus, saw repeated attacks and reconstructions over the millennia. And the Swabhiman Parv marked the first major recorded attack in 1026 by Mahmud. Now, nobody denies the historicity of those attacks. After Mahmud destroyed the temple built by the Solanki king Mularaj in 1026 Common Era, there was another round of demolition that Somnath faced at the hands of Alaf Khan, a general of Alauddin Khilji, in 1299. Subsequently, Muzaffar Khan, a governor of Gujarat, desecrated the same temple in 1394. Sultan Mahmud Begra in 1459, and then during the Mughal reign of Aurangzeb, Somnath was ordered demolished thrice in 1669, 1702 and 1706, by which time it was almost turned into a mosque. This repeated destruction should ideally be seen as evidence of the kind of repeated reconstruction that was done by the Hindus over all these years and centuries. But that's where history writing comes into play. Last episode, I narrated how JNU became a left bastion by design and not default. India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, willed the intellectual spaces of India, from university campuses to the bureaucracy to the cultural institutions, to be filled with left-of-center ideologues, thus providing an inexhaustible supply of talent for his socialist governance. A product of that was history writing, which doctored a sanitized past of India, where either no brutal attacks on our civilization, the likes of which Somnath and Nalanda faced, happened, or if those attacks had to be acknowledged, the scale of destruction and their motivation in the iconoclasm of medieval Islam had to be muted. Enter Romila Thapar, a professor emeritus of JNU. Yes, the same JNU we discussed. She is variously described as a celebrated historian or doyen of Indian historians, who as recently as 2023 wrote a book on Somnath. This is what she writes. In 1026, Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni raided the Hindu temple of Somnath. The story of the raid has reverberated in Indian history, but largely during the Raj. It was first depicted as a trauma for the Hindu population, not in India, but in the House of Commons in London. This is according to Thapar. The triumphalist accounts of the event in Turco-Persian chronicles became the main source for most of the 18th century historians. It suited everyone and helped the British to divide and rule the subcontinent. That's what Thapar says. For her, the temple was destroyed by Mahmud in search of a medieval Arab goddess, Manath, and not because he saw in Somnath a symbol of Hindu civilizational pride. She further says in the book that the temple was rebuilt by Kumarpal as per some Jain chronicles, not because it was destroyed by Mahmud of Ghazni, but because of the corroding effect of the seas, because of which the temple lay in a dilapidated state. Such chicanery of words, and guess what? The likes of Thapar made a lifetime, complete with Padma Awards, out of this intellectual dishonesty, courtesy Nehru's patronage. Pandit Nehru himself was so discomfited by the reconstruction imagined by Sardar Patel, supervised by Kanhaiya Lal Munshi and blessed by the then President Rajendra Prasad, that he wrote as many as 17 letters marking his opposition to the Somnath project. In one cribbing apologia to Liaquat Ali Khan, the then Prime Minister of Pakistan, for example, Panditji protested that Pakistani radio was speaking of doors of the Somnath temple being brought to India from Afghanistan, while there was no truth to the story. Guess what? Maybe it did not happen immediately after independence. But Romila Thapar, the same protege of Nehru, narrates in her latest book about the episode of the doors brought back from Ghazni to Agra during the British times in the 2023 book. Yes. Such charade we have lived through. Or look at this letter that Nehru wrote to the All India Radio instructing the toning down of the coverage of the consecration event in 1951 that Rajendra Babu attended despite protests by the Prime Minister. Or these two letters written by Nehru to the chief ministers, dated May 2 and August 1, 1951, in which he hems and haws, literally, about the bad image of India the presence of his ministers would create abroad by being present there at the consecration ceremony of Somnath temple. Guess what? Nehru did not want to get the optics wrong then, just as Modi did not want to get the optics wrong now. Only the audiences are different. For Nehru, the audience was the Islamic world in West Asia and the Muslim population back home. For Modi, the audience is Hindu and at home. Irony is that Modi has been bestowed the highest civilian honors by at least a dozen Islamic nations, including Saudi Arabia, the custodian of the two holy mosques of Islam. The fact is, they care two hoots about India's internal politics so long as principles of natural justice and good governance are followed. They would not have cared then also, in Nehru's times. Just that it was only in Nehru's mind that the reconstruction of Somnath conflated with secularism and not reclamation of India's civilizational pride. Modi has corrected that wrong. That takes us to another wrong Prime Minister Modi is correcting, subtly, slowly, but surely. For those who came of age through campuses during India's early liberalization years, the terror of credit rating agencies would be sort of fresh in the minds. They literally determined our collective destinies by throwing up jumbled soup of alphabets. If you were AAA or AAA, you were in the elite company of Western nations. And the global financial establishment looked at you with benign indulgences, like cheap capital. If you were BB or worse, junk, your goose as an economy was cooked, which happened with India a couple of times with ratings downgrades through the 1990s and 2000s. Despite our size and scale, we were helpless. We did not control the process or the product. Like India, rest of the non-Western world, increasingly called Global South these days, was a mute spectator to a few deciding the fate of the many. Not anymore. There's the pushback. This coming week, India is launching its own yardstick to judge the rest of the world. It's going to be called RNI, Responsible Nations Index. Not exactly similar as the financial ratings, but that's the whole debate. Who gets to decide where you stand in the Committee of Nations? Let me first dig a little deeper into the existing system. Going back to the end of the World War II and the setting up of the Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF and the World Bank, the framework cast US hegemony in stone with dollar as the default reserve currency of the world pegged to the gold, and the transatlantic Western Bloc acting as its guarantor. Metrics like the GDP growth, debt to GDP ratio, and inflation became the universal yardsticks of judging a country's credit worthiness. So far, so good. By the 1970s, 3 private agencies monopolized the game. Recall how the mood of the Moody's, standards of S&P or Standard & Poor, or fiddling by Fitch, all 3 US-based, in the case of Fitch, French-owned, would determine the cost of borrowing for nations including India. The big 3 came to dominate almost 100% of the world ratings market by the turn of the century. There's a template of cognitive bias. The big 3 in tandem with the IMF and the World Bank, between them enforce Western ideals. Cut welfare, privatize, open markets, or face higher costs. This essentially became a system like a straw-sucking savings from the Global South, funding consumption in the Global North, even as the Global South borrowed back at premiums dictated by the same biased ratings. It's a rigged game where ratings act as enforcers, limiting sovereignty and perpetuating inequality. Investors treated ratings as gospel. Pension funds and banks face mandates to favor high-rated bonds. Post-Cold War, that is in the 1990s and thereafter, ratings became a geopolitical weapon to align developing states with Western agendas. Argentina's 2001 default followed repeated downgrades amid IMF austerity clashes, crippling recovery. Greece's 2010 debt crisis saw agencies amplify Eurozone woes, pressuring Athens towards privatization. During the 2016 Brexit, while the S&P did downgrade the UK mildly, it hammered Brazil over impeachment, essentially a political process. Venezuela, Russia, Iran, the list is endless. Over time, the biases stood exposed. Emerging markets got harsher treatment than advanced economies, even when fundamentals were similar. It's not just numbers, it's control. During the turn of the century, Asian financial crisis, for example, the S&P downgraded countries en masse, triggering capital flight and deepening the mess. Similarly, during the COVID-19 pandemic years, 95% of the downgrades hit only developing countries, despite milder economic hits than in the West. Why? Geopolitical proximity, cultural biases, and information asymmetries favor the global north. Now the world's reacting, and BRICS is a leading example or leading the charge, calling out the ratings terrorism of the West during the 2024 Kazan summit. Their new development bank, launched in 2014, offers loans without the IMF's harsh conditions, funding infrastructure in local currencies to dodge dollar traps. Guess what? Such is the terror of the existing arrangement, even now that the NDB has to comply with sanctions on Russia. But that only proves the point. No more passive acceptance of Western models. Russia, post-2014 sanctions, created the National Rating Agency. China launched Dagong, rating itself AAA. That's where RNI, Responsible Nations Index of India, comes into the picture. A brainchild of Prime Minister Narendra Modi as part of his larger push for Atmanirbharta and shedding of colonial mindset. Why let a declining West dictate the agenda? Look at the matrix. The RNI would be structured around three core dimensions. One, internal responsibility focusing on dignity, justice, and the well-being of citizens. Two, environmental responsibility covering stewardship of natural resources and climate action. And three, external responsibility measuring a country's contribution to peace, cooperation, and global stability. Does not sound like GDP, debt, etc., but that's the whole point. How do you judge India's Operation Maitri, for example, when we supplied COVID vaccines to the rest of the world? That's where responsibility as a member of the Committee of Nations comes in. Should it not get reflected in ratings? Fitch and Moody's won't. So let's do it on our own, our way. The index, or the RNI, would cover 154 countries and is built on transparent, globally sourced data to ensure credibility and comparability. JNU and IIM Mumbai have provided institutional support. The RNI would be India's first globally anchored framework to evaluate countries on responsible governance, social well-being, environmental stewardship, and global responsibility. The initiative aims to encourage global dialogue on ethics, sustainability, food security, and value-based leadership, contributing to a more balanced understanding of national performance on the global stage. The geopolitics of rating nations is all set to change. Wait till Monday. Moving on to the last segment.
This bill would allow...
And India also is bullying.
Yes, sir. So he put a 25% tariff on India for buying Russian oil. I was at the Indian ambassador's house about a month ago, and all he wanted to talk about is how they're buying less Russian oil. Would you tell the president to relieve the tariff? I really do believe that what he did with India is the chief reason India is now buying substantially less Russian oil. So I hope we pass this bill soon. And after
They wanted to make me happy, basically. Modi's a very good man.
Yes.
He's a good guy. He knew I was not happy, and it was important to make me happy. They do trade. And we can raise tariffs on them very quickly, and it would be very bad for them.
It's been a year of tariffs, but tariffs as Donald Trump completes one as President of the United States next week in his second term. But reports and numbers on the trade front are not what the Trumpistas or the mega supporters of Trump would have loved to hear. India's merchandise exports to the US during April-December period saw an almost 10% jump, rising to approximately US $66 billion, compared to US $60 billion in the previous year. In the month of November itself, the year-on-year increase was a whopping 22% at US $7 billion. Even with punitive tariffs in place, industries like electronics, which are up 16%, marine products up 11%, pharmaceuticals up 5%, and engineering goods stayed strong. Overall exports also showed a rising clip of 5%. In December of last year, that is 2025, India's overall merchandise exports reached US $38.5 billion, a 2 percentage point increase year on year. And the 9-month cumulative exports edged 3% to US $330 billion. India's export surge defies the odds. Weren't we supposed to fold under Trump's reciprocal hammer? Instead, Indian shipments of pharma, electronics, textiles, and rice to the US grew steadily, even as duties bit into margins, of course. Why? Diversification and niches. Pharma dodged full hits due to essential status. Electronics filled the void left by China, and rice carved a premium lane despite existing tariffs. There's more to the story. While India's US export dependence dipped slightly from 23 to 20%, which means we diversified, absolute volumes rose as American buyers sought alternatives to pricier Chinese products. And even as our manufacturing edge shone through, India upped its game. Last year saw at least half a dozen FTAs getting signed from New Zealand to UAE to the UK and Oman, plus the European Economic Community. Trade deals with Canada and the EU are close. All this offsets the US friction. This resilience suggests a few takeaways. Indian exporters shifted strategies, seeking tariff exemptions, pivoting to less targeted sectors, and reinforcing global supply chain linkages. Indian smartphones found new markets like Slovakia, Israel, Latvia, Vietnam, South Korea, among others. So while tariffs might have slowed growth in targeted categories, they did not derail India's broader export strength to the US, arguably one of the signature goals of Trump's strategy. The aim was ambitious so far as Trump is concerned: shield the US manufacturing, rebalance trade deficits, and coax partners into fairer deals. But the India story proves otherwise. And that's still not the complete picture. Look at China and you realize the gaping hole in Trump's strategy. Despite facing intense US tariffs of up to 47.5%, China recorded a jaw-dropping global trade surplus of US $1.2 trillion. That colossal surplus reflected not just resilience, but strategic adaptation. Chinese manufacturers sidestepped US tariffs by boosting exports to ASEAN, up 13%, Africa up 26%, Latin America up 7%, and the EU up 8%. Domestic policies and a weakened yuan made Chinese goods cheaper abroad. Taken together, these trends paint a picture of limited leverage for Team Trump. India weathered the storm by channeling growth through resilient sectors and supply chain flexibility. China simply rerouted its trade and expanded it elsewhere. There's another interesting takeaway. The Kazan reset with China that India had is paying off. Our merchandise exports to China in the last 6 months of 2025 versus 2024 grew 37%, $14 plus billion versus $10.42 billion. China recorded notably higher Indian imports, with electronics and engineering goods seeing sizable increases. So Washington needs to take note. I spoke to a Commerce Ministry official part of the trade negotiations some time back, and if I rephrase his anecdotal account of the difference between American and European strategies when it comes to negotiating the trade deal, it comes down to one word: flexibility. Like the EU officials were comfortable to take agriculture off the table so that talks could proceed. Unlike in the case of the United States, where stalemate is centered around the GM crops and the dairy sector. Also, and that's a big factor, the official told me that he sensed that the American team came with a strong brief but limited freedom in terms of give and take. Obviously, because everything has to go right up to the top, to the White House. Why have tariffs seemingly failed? For one, substitution effect. Tariffs create vacuums that others fill. Basic economics Trump overlooked. As Chinese goods got pricier, India ramped up low-cost alternatives like generic drugs, replacing pricier Chinese APIs, or textiles dodging full steel aluminum add-ons. US importers did not reshore, they swapped suppliers, keeping trade volumes high. Data shows only 17 of the 57 targeted nations cut deals with Trump, leaving heavyweights like India and China defiant. Meanwhile, US manufacturing jobs flatlined. Tariffs raised input costs for autos and tech, killing almost 100,000 positions as per some estimates, as firms passed hikes to buyers amid 2025's inflation bout. US consumers paid anything between $200 to $500 more yearly per household, as per some think tanks. Long-term US GDP looks like taking a half a percentage point or even 1 percentage point hit from disrupted supply chains. The Venezuela, Greenland, Iran headlines could be planned distractions for these reasons ahead of the midterm elections. And then there are the geopolitical costs. India's is the most classic case of standing up to Trump's tariff bullying. Well, not just tariffs, but the Pakistan pivot also, that has put the larger India-United States relationship into a downward spiral that would not be easy for just Sergio Gore, the new US ambassador to India, to retrieve. Prime Minister Modi has earned plaudits from around the world to have managed the friction with Trump so well, even as leaders around the world, particularly in Europe, seem to be capitulating. This is an evolving story and we shall keep coming back to it. Thanks for watching.
MDH की हल्दी मिर्ची धनिया करे कमाल, ये रंग दे, ये खुशबू दे, ये तीखा, ये कम पड़े, क्या निराला MDH मसाला।
प्लीज स्टॉप। झुमका तेरा झुमका, तेरा झुमका
नॉट देयर, मेरा काउंटर टॉप टूट जाएगा।
तेरा झुमका। मेरी चिमनी टूट जाएगी। What are you doing?
रानी, इस घर में कुछ है जो टूटता नहीं।
ये पिलर कभी नहीं टूटेगा। रुंगटा स्टील TMT से बना।
रुंगटा नहीं तो घर स्ट्रॉन्ग नहीं। रुंगटा स्टील TMT बार एकदम सॉलिड।
आर प्योर सूजी पास्ता, उबालो, मिलाओ और खाओ।
8 मिनट में तैयार।
क्या टेस्ट है, सबका राजा आर प्योर मसाला। केसरिया से मन जोगी हुआ रे, दिल झूमे देखो मतवारा हुआ रे। केसरिया से मन जोगी हुआ।
हर पल मनाओ केसरी त्योहार। विमल, बोलो जुबान केसरी।
ये है सीक्रेट रेसिपी MDH का जीरा सिप जल जीरा मसाला। सिप जीरा सिप जीरा सिप MDH का जल जीरा सिप MDH का जल जीरा सिप।
Iran is boiling. Iranians are protesting against the Khamenei regime. US President Donald Trump has urged Iranians to keep protesting and take over institutions, and has assured them that help is on the way.
Well, no, they're starting to, it looks like, and there seem to be some people killed that aren't supposed to be killed. These are violent, if you call them leaders, I don't know if they're leaders or just they rule through violence. But we're looking at it very seriously. The military is looking at it, and we're looking at some very strong options. We'll make a determination. Well, if they do that, we'll consider things targets they wouldn't believe. If they do that, we will hit them at levels that they've never been hit before. They won't even believe it. I have options that are so strong. So, I mean, if they did that, it'll be met with a very, very powerful force.
So Iran's in big.
An out-of-control dump truck hit 2 cars at a toll plaza in Kanpur. The employee at the toll plaza, who was standing in front of the second car, was dragged for a few meters. The victim, identified as Ramakant Richarya, suffered grievous injuries in the incident. He was immediately rushed to the nearby medical college for treatment, where his condition is said to remain critical. The entire incident was captured on the toll plaza's CCTV camera, and the footage is now going viral on social media platforms. Police later took the truck driver into custody, and an investigation into the incident is underway. The incident is said to have occurred at the same toll plaza on the Kanpur highway.
Our pure Shahi Paneer Masala. Delicious, healthy, every day.
हर पल मनाओ केसरी त्योहार। विमल, बोलो जुबान केसरी।
ये है सीक्रेट रेसिपी MDH का जीरा सिप जल जीरा मसाला।
इसको घर पे लगाओगे तो शादी का तो पता नहीं, पर घर पक्का नहीं टूटेगा।
रुंगटा नहीं तो घर स्ट्रॉन्ग नहीं। रुंगटा स्टील TMT बार एकदम सॉलिड।
पहाड़ों में एक हाइकिंग स्टिक भी बन सकती है।
थोड़े में ज्यादा स्वाद, यही तो है इसकी खास बात। वाओ मामा, क्या स्वाद है? अरे मेरे राजा,
आधे बाउल दही में 4 चम्मच MDH चटनी पुदीना मसाला डाला, स्टर करो, पुदीना चटनी तैयार। MDH चटनी पुदीना मसाला।
MDH